Hello and welcome to your local anthropologist. I'm your host, Alina, and this is the 7th episode in my series, Utopia of Play, an anthropological lens on the modern workplace. I considered pausing this episode to do a segue and a bonus episode on collective action and the role of unions in the corporate world, and how these threaten power in the structures that we understand it. I thought about doing that, and then I thought maybe it would be more useful for you, especially if your background's not in anthropology, to get an understanding of gift economies before I explore how they are perversed and exploited, and transformed under capitalism and into the corporate environment. And so I decided that maybe we can look at that next time, and it will give me more time to write about it. So for today's episode, I'm going to be looking at the gift. Last time we looked at how the architecture of debt colonizes our future, forcing us to mortgage our time to pay for our past. Debt's logic is one of extraction and enclosure, turning time into a scarce commodity, a resource that is always running out. So what's the alternative? If debt colonizes time, perhaps the economy of the gift frees it. Where debt demands a predetermined future, the gift opens a space of possibility. It creates the slack, the generosity, the open-ended time that play and creation require. This is the logic not of the ledger, but of the pulse, the gift. It is a logic I have felt in the unexpected exchanges, guidance from a senior colleague who asked for nothing in return, the collaborative frenzy of a project that felt less like work and more like a shared offering, the open source code that runs the world given freely. These moments feel different. They feel like life, not just transaction. Let's explore this pulse further. Its flicker within the sterile machine of modern capitalism. First, by looking at a radical theory proposed by Marcel Mauss in his 1925 masterpiece, The Gift. From the potlatch ceremonies of the Pacific Northwest to the digital potlatch of our social media feeds, from the moral economy of the kula ring to the performative generosity of corporate culture, I want to ask a simple question. What does it mean to give, to work, and to owe in a world defined by exchange? Generosity as reputation. There is a story capitalism tells us that human nature is selfish, that accumulation is rational, that we have always bartered our way toward progress. It is a story told not only by economists but by its foot soldiers like Ayn Rand, a foundational myth that justifies a world of winners and losers. Marcel Mauss spent his life collecting the receipts for this lie. He documented the potlatch ceremonies where Northwest Coast chiefs competed not to accumulate wealth, but to destroy it. Burning canoes, shattering coppers, giving away entire harvests in a glorious competitive frenzy of generosity. Status was not measured by what you kept, but by what you could afford to lose. He traced the Kula Ring of Melanesia, a vast archipelago where two kinds of ceremonial valuables, shell necklaces and armbands, traveled in opposite directions across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Men risked their lives on long voyages not for profit, but for prestige. These objects themselves were rarely worn. Their power was in their motion. To keep a Kula valuable was to kill it. From these and other examples, Mauss formulated his revolutionary theory of the total social fact. The gift, for Mauss, was not a simple economic transaction with social side effects. It was the central knot where law, economy, religion, aesthetics, and kinship all tied together. It was the fundamental technology of peace, creating intricate webs of mutual obligation that made war more costly than alliance. A gift, he argued, is never free. It initiates a cycle of three intertwined obligations: to give, to receive, and to reciprocate. You can feel the ghost of this logic in the modern potlatch of a Kickstarter campaign, where backers give not for a guaranteed return, but to participate in bringing an idea to life. You see it in open source programmers who give away code that become the foundation of the internet, their status measured in commits and respect, not stock options. And you feel its profound absence in the sterile transaction of a student loan, a bond that creates no community, only a debtor. This is the fundamental inversion we live inside. In a gift economy, giving increases your status. In a debt economy, owing decreases it. One logic builds community and the other forges cages. The spirit in the circuit. What compels this return? Why does a gift create a lingering sense of debt while a purchase settles the account and severs the tie? Mauss found his answer in the Maori concept of hau. The hau is not the object itself, but the spirit of the giver, the life force woven into the gift. It acts like a force of gravity that pulls the gift into circulation, demanding it must be not held onto for too long, that it must move, create, and bind again. When you receive a gift, you don't just receive an object. You receive a piece of the giver's social essence. To keep it without reciprocation is to hold that essence hostage. The hau grows restless. It wants to return home, enriched by its journey. This is not primitive superstition. It is a precise metaphor for the invisible architecture of a functioning society. The hau is honor, reputation, memory, belonging. The entire spectrum of social credit that cannot be priced but constitutes the only wealth that ultimately matters. It is the knowledge that when you give, something of you travels with the gift, creating relationships that outlast any single transaction. This logic of glorious excessive expenditure was radicalized by the French philosopher Georges Bataille. In his theory of the accursed share, he elaborates on this dynamic. Every society produces a surplus of energy. The fundamental political question is what to do with it. Capitalism directs this surplus into endless, sterile accumulation, hoarding it in offshore accounts, compounding it in silent vaults. But earlier societies, Bataille argued, understood that this surplus had to be spent gloriously and wastefully in festival, in ritual, in the glorious destruction of the potlatch. This unproductive expenditure was not irrational. It was the necessary fire that kept the social cosmos alive. To hoard the surplus was to invite rot, stagnation, and social death. The potlatch wasn't economic nonsense. It was a sophisticated social technology for preventing the accumulation of power and keeping the collective body in a state of dynamic, playful exchange. Another take on this comes from Lewis Hyde, who considered the same spirit animating the creative act. Artistic inspiration, he argues, is a form of gift. The artist is a conduit for a gift that must be passed on. A poem, a song, a theory. It arrives as a debt to the unknown, to tradition, to the muse, and is repaid by being given away. Or, as I like to call, art begets art. The artwork treated as a pure commodity dies on the wall, a captive of its price tag. But the work that circulates as a gift is copied, shared, remixed, argued over. It stays alive. It generates culture, not just capital. This, for Hyde, is why the artist is so often structurally poor in a market society. They are operating a gift-based enterprise inside a debt-based economy. It was Pierre Bourdieu, however, who provided another sharp layer of understanding how the hau operates within modern stratified societies. In Outline of a Theory of Practice, he introduced concepts like symbolic capital and misrecognition. The gift economy, he argues, never truly disappeared. It was simply sublimated. The hau now circulates as reputation, influence, credit in the symbolic sense. The key to its operation is misrecognition, the collective agreement to pretend that these exchanges are disinterested, pure generosity, when in fact they are investments in social capital. The corporate mentor offering guidance, the academic sharing a preprint, the manager staying late with the team, all of these are engaged in a complex dance of giving that builds allegiance, obligation, and a hidden economy of honor. We are all constantly managing this hau. The hostile takeover of social life. The shift from a world woven with gifts to one wired for debt was not a gentle evolution. It was a hostile takeover of social life, and its architects left a clear paper trail. The first and most violent move was what we discussed in the last post, what Karl Polanyi in The Great Transformation called the disembedding of the economy. In pre-capitalist societies, economic life was submerged in social relations. Exchange, production, and distribution were governed by kinship, ritual, and moral codes. The market as an autonomous, self-regulating force was a fiction that had to be violently imposed. This required tearing apart the social fabric that had sustained communities for millennia. As feminist theorist Genevieve Vaughn calls this the imposition of an alien exchange logic into a world that runs on gift logic. In her view, the foundational economy, the one that keeps humans alive, is the gift economy. A mother nurses her infant without a contract, a community gathers to rebuild a barn, their labor a shared offering. This is the mycelial network of human survival, an economy of care that operates on the principle to each according to their need. Capitalism did not replace this substrate. It parasitizes it, forcing the gift to justify itself in the alien tongue of the market. Anthropologist Chris Gregory crystallizes the stakes of this takeover. In gift economies, we use things to create relationships between people. In commodity economies, we use people to create relationships between things. The inversion is total. Where a kula valuable once cemented a lifelong alliance between chiefs, a corporate merger now creates a strategic partnership between abstract legal entities, while the employees who do the actual work become redundant human resources. We became the servants of the objects we once used to bind us together. It's exactly the logic of consumerism. Capitalism declared everything alienable. The 18th century British Enclosure Acts did not just fence off land, they transformed a living commons, which was a source of subsistence, ritual, and community, into a private asset. This logic now extends into our genetic data, our social networks, and our attention. The very thing that constitutes the fabric of self are daily strip-mined and sold back to us as subscriptions. The result is what economist Nancy Folbury calls the prisoner's dilemma of care. Care work is priceless. It's so essential it transcends price. But in the perverse calculus of the market, priceless is translated as worthless. This creates a systemic trap. Those who care most are exploited most, because the work will be done out of love regardless of pay. The entire structure of capitalist production free rides on this unpaid, life-sustaining labor. We see it in the pink-collar ghetto of the underpaid care work, and in the modern corporation's expectation that employees offer discretionary effort, a corporate euphemism for the gift of our energy and creativity given freely and extracted systematically. This history is not a closed chapter. It is the active architecture of our exhaustion. It's the reason a teacher's care is worth less than a banker's cynicism, and the reason we feel a vague sense of theft when we clock out as if the best parts of our life were left behind unaccounted for. We are not failing to balance work and life. We are living inside the ongoing calculated violence of an inversion that sold our bonds for a debt. Labor and obligation. So how does Mauss's triad of obligations to give, to receive, to reciprocate manifest in the contemporary workplace? It is here that the ghost of the gift becomes most palpable and most painfully distorted. Perhaps it's a little on the nose, but an obvious example is emotional labor. The customer service smile, the bartender's cheerful banter, the nurse's comforting touch. These are not innate personality traits, but managed performances. Gifts of the self that are mandated by the job description. We are asked to give not just our time, but our emotional vitality. This is a perversion of the gift, for it is not freely given, but coerced. It's reciprocity, not a social bond, but a wage. When the how of our emotional energy is extracted, it leads not to prestige, but to burnout, a restless spirit that cannot find its way home. We then have the culture of unpaid overtime and passion. In creative industries, tech, and academia, the expectation to work late, to answer emails on weekends, to treat one's job as a calling, is the modern equivalent of the obligatory gift. We give this time as a demonstration of commitment, a performative sacrifice in the hope of future reciprocation, a promotion, a permanent contract, a symbolic capital. It is a Bautavian expenditure, but one that benefits the corporation, not the community. The potlatch has been internalized. We burn our own time, our health, our social lives in a competitive frenzy to prove our worth. the how of labor is captured and the reciprocation is never guaranteed. Corporate culture itself has become a master of Mausian manipulation. Perks like free meals, ping pong tables, and meditation rooms are presented as gifts, as markers of a benevolent familial workplace. But, as Jacques Derrida would argue in Given Time, the pure gift is an impossibility. There is always a calculation. These corporate gifts create a powerful sense of obligation, a soft coercion that blurs the lines between work and life and encourages us to give more of ourselves. It is a strategy to enclose the last remnants of the social within the walls of the office, transforming potential solidarity into brand loyalty. Then we have the most disappointing one, for me at least, the internet. It began as a vast experiment in gift economics, the site of both our greatest commons and our most grotesque extraction. Early users built the web's infrastructure on open source software. We built Wikipedia. We answer each other's questions on forums. We create memes and remix culture. We're all operating on gift logic, building a commons through collective contribution. We are all performing a vast digital potlatch, constantly giving the gift of our data, our content, our attention, our social networks. This giving creates immense social and cultural value, a fertile commons built on the logic of the gift. But this commons has been enclosed. As Yanis Varoufakis argues in his theory of techno-feudalism, we are no longer primarily exploited as workers. We are exploited as serfs on the digital fiefdoms of cloud capitalists. The platforms enclose the commons we build, parasitize the social bonds we create, and extract a form of digital rent from every interaction. It is the ultimate perversion of the gift. Our innate drive to relate and create is fenced off, monetized, and used to reinforce the very power that exploits us. Every like, every comment, every photo, it's gift work, repackaged as commodity. Our generosity transformed into someone else's profit. We give freely, and they take systematically. The open hand. The tension between gift and wage, giving and exploitation is the defining moral conflict of our working lives. We are caught between two worlds, an ancient pulsing logic of reciprocity that builds community and a cold, modern logic of debt that builds cages. Mauss's The Gift is not merely an anthropological curiosity, it is a diagnostic tool and a political manifesto. It allows us to name the theft we feel when our care is monetized, our creativity captured, and our social bonds turned into data points. Reimagining labor through Mauss's ethics does not mean a return to primitivism. It means recognizing that the economy is, and always has been, a moral project. It means fighting to re-embed economic relations with social ones, to demand that care work be seen as valued, that digital commons be protected, that corporate quote-unquote gifts be seen as the calculated obligations they are, and that our time be treated not as a commodity to be spent, but as a gift to be given meaningfully. The alternative to the closed fist of debt is the open hand of the gift. It is an economy where status flows from contribution, not accumulation, where value is measured in vitality, not vaults, and where the obligation we feel is not to a faceless ledger, but to each other. It is the space of possibility, the slack in the system, the time for play. And as the old world of debt crumbles under the weight of its own contradictions, it is this pulse that may just guide us toward a more humane future. Thank you so much for listening to Your Local Anthropologist. I'm your host, Alina, and this was the 7th episode in the series Utopia of Play, an anthropological lens on the modern workplace. I hope you're enjoying the series and have been able to identify and relate to some of the things being shared today, and of course that you've been introduced to new ideas that help you reconsider and rethink your own life in a meaningful way. If you would be interested in getting the written version of these episodes, you can do so on yourlocalanthropologist.com, where I have now made it a private members only area, which means that you will need to subscribe, but it is totally free. And that means you'll get a weekly newsletter from Your Local Anthropologist with any updates from me and any new episodes in Utopia of Play. I want to add a small correction because I think I used a Hungarian pronunciation for Janus Varoufakis' name, and I added an ish sound, which is not in his name, so apologies for that. I also want to say that there is a small section of this episode that has a little bit of poor quality audio because I was struggling with the equipment this week when I was recording today's episode, so apologies for that, and I hope it doesn't disrupt you too much. Next time on Utopia of Play, I will be adding a bonus episode to the series called We Got Union Busting Before GTA 6, Part 1. So I hope you'll join me then. Thank you so much for listening.